Story number 1. Shadows at Sunset Station. The Arizona desert stretches out endlessly. A sea of sand and rock under a sky that seems to burn with its own light. Sunset Station gas and go sits solitary on the edge of Highway 66. Its faded sign flickering intermittently like a dying heartbeat. I never believed in ghosts, but working the night shift here has changed that belief forever. I'm Mike Lawson, the lone attendant at Sunset Station. Most nights are uneventful. Just the hum of the pumps, the occasional car passing by, and the distant howl of coyotes. But lately, things have been different. The air feels heavier, the shadows deeper, and an unsettling presence lingers in every corner of the old building. Started a few weeks ago, the lights above the pumps began to flicker more often, dimming and brightening without reason. First, I chalked it up to faulty wiring, but the frequency and timing were too irregular. Sometimes, during the dead of night, the lights would dim completely, plunging the station into darkness for mere seconds before snapping back to life. Then came the footsteps. I'd be stocking shelves or cleaning the bathrooms when I'd hear them, soft, deliberate steps echoing through the empty store. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the desert wind playing tricks on my ears. But the footsteps continued, growing more persistent and closer each night, despite there being no one else around. The strangest occurrence happened one particularly quiet night. I was in the office, reviewing sales reports under the harsh fluorescent light. When the camera screen flickered, a shadow moved across the monitor, a man dressed in 1950s attire, complete with a fedora and a suit that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a bygone era. He stood motionless at the cashier's counter, staring directly into the lens. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. "Sam," I whispered to myself, the name of the station's former owner flashing in my mind. Sam Whitaker had owned Sunset Station until his sudden disappearance in 1978. The case was never solved. The station closed shortly after his vanishing, and it had sat abandoned for years before I took the job. I approached the camera, squinting through the dim light. The man was still there, his eyes empty, his expression unreadable. I reached out to adjust the lens, but my hand passed through the screen as if it were made of smoke. Panic surged through me as the image distorted, the man's figure wavering like a reflection on disturbed water. He let out a silent scream, his mouth open in an eternal plea before disappearing entirely. Shaken, I decided to investigate the station's history. Late-night searches through old newspapers and town records revealed snippets of Sam Whitaker's life. He was known as a friendly, hard-working man, beloved by the community. His disappearance had left a void. The station left to decay in his absence. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd left for a new life. Others whispered darker theories involving desert secrets and hidden debts. Determined to find answers, I spent the next few nights documenting the strange phenomena. I set up extra cameras, placed mirrors in strategic spots, and even installed a motion-activated light in the basement. Nothing concrete emerged, no figures, no clear evidence, just the persistent feeling of being watched. One night, as a fierce sandstorm raged outside, the phenomena escalated. The lights flickered violently, the power surging and dipping like a heartbeat. The footsteps became frantic, pounding against the floors with a sense of urgency that sent chills down my spine. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut, the sound deafening in the confined space. I rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lights went out entirely, leaving me in pitch darkness, save for the faint glow of lightning outside. The whispers began then, soft and sorrowful, echoing through the halls. "Help us. Don't leave us." I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. I heard the footsteps again, now right behind me, their presence suffocating. I spun around, shining the light into the shadows. But there was no one there, only the remnants of old advertisements and dusty shelves. Desperate, I made my way to the office, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. The camera in front of me flickered back to life, displaying the man from the past once more. This time, he wasn't alone. Another figure appeared beside him, a woman in a vintage dress, her face pale and eyes hollow with sorrow. They reached out towards me, their forms wavering like mist. "Remember us? Don't forget." Tears welled up in my eyes as the realization hit me. These were the spirits of Sam and his family, trapped in a loop of their final moments. Their unresolved pain and sudden disappearance had bound them to the station. Forever reliving the night they lost everything. Gathering every ounce of courage, I spoke softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. How can I help you find peace?" The room seemed to breathe, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as the whispers turned into gentle pleas. "Help us. Remember our story." I began recounting what I'd learned, the need to honor their memory and bring closure to their tragic tale. I placed the old photographs from the basement on the office desk, lighting candles around them to symbolize remembrance and respect. As I spoke, the shadows receded, the spirits becoming clearer yet more peaceful. The man and woman smiled softly, their eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. The basement door creaked open, revealing a path to the past that no longer held them captive. "Thank you," the man whispered, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "Now we can rest." The lights flickered back on, the basement door closing quietly behind them. The air felt warmer, the tension dissipating as if a heavy burden had been lifted. I sat back, exhausted but hopeful, knowing that I had finally helped the restless souls find the peace they so desperately sought. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences ceased. The lights remained steady, the footsteps vanished, and the eerie images on the camera were replaced with the ordinary hum of night activities. Sunset Station Gas and Go felt different, less haunted, more like a place of healing and remembrance. I continued my job with a renewed sense of purpose, honoring the memory of Sam Whitaker and his family by keeping the station clean and welcoming. I placed a small plaque by the counter, commemorating their lives and the closure I had helped bring. Years later, Sunset Station remains a quiet sentinel on Highway 66, its dark past acknowledged and respected. Visitors sometimes stop by, intrigued by the station's history, unaware of the spirits that once haunted its halls. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the desert wind whispers through the trees, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the window, a silent reminder of the night I faced my fears and helped restless souls find their way home. Story number 2. Whispers at Whitmore's. The year was 1978, and Michigan winters were unforgiving. The snow lay thick on the ground, muffling the sounds of the world outside. I never imagined that a simple late-night stop at a gas station could unravel into a nightmare. But that's exactly what happened at Whitmore's Gas and Go. I was driving home from a long shift at the factory, my mind numb from hours of repetitive work and the monotony of the highway. The road stretched endlessly before me, the dark sky dotted with the occasional flicker of passing headlights. My gas gauge had been creeping lower for days, and tonight, it had finally given up the ghost. Relief washed over me as I spotted the neon sign of Whitmore's Gas and Go, its vibrant glow a beacon in the desolate stretch of road. The station was a relic from another time, whitewashed walls, a large canopy over the pumps, and a solitary attendant manning the corner office. I parked my car beside pump 3, the heater struggling against the biting cold. As I approached the pump, the attendant looked up from his newspaper, his expression neutral. "Evening," I greeted, trying to shake off the weariness that clung to me like a heavy coat. "Evening," he replied, his voice steady. "Need a fill-up?" "Yeah, thanks," I said, starting the pump. The hum of the nozzle was oddly comforting, a steady rhythm amidst the stillness of the night. I glanced around the empty lot, the snow reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights. It was quiet, too quiet. In fact, my unease began to grow as I noticed a shadowy figure standing near pump 7. barely visible against the darkness. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, conjured by the isolation and the relentless winter. But the figure remained, motionless, staring directly at me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. Shaking off the feeling, I continued to pump gas. But the image of the man lingered in my mind. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. There was something unsettling about his presence, a silent watchfulness that made me uncomfortable. Once the tank was full, I turned to pay, only to find the station still deserted. The attendant was nowhere to be seen in the office. Odd, I muttered to myself, reaching for my wallet. As I handed over my card, the shadowy figure began to move, slowly walking towards the station with deliberate steps. "Everything all right?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. But the man didn't respond. Instead, he stopped a few feet away. His eyes, or where his eyes should be, seemed to bore into mine. My heart raced as I backed away, the tension thick in the cold night air. "Look, I'm just going to leave," I said, turning towards my car. As I did, the man extended his hand, a gloved finger pointing towards the office. I hesitated, a sense of dread settling in. "What do you want?" Before I could formulate a response, the office door swung open, revealing the attendant. He looked disheveled, his hair tousled and eyes wide with panic. "There you are," he said, rushing towards me. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Confused and anxious, I followed him into the office. The room was cluttered with old records, maps, and newspaper clippings pinned to the walls. The attendant gestured for me to sit. "Have you seen him?" he asked, his voice trembling. "The man outside?" I nodded, still trying to process the encounter. "Yes, I did. Why? Is everything okay?" The attendant took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he spoke. "No, everything is not okay. We've had a series of disappearances around here. People who stopped at Whitmore's Gas and Go and never left. We suspect it's someone on the inside, someone who has been quietly stalking and eliminating customers." My blood ran cold. "You think the attendant is involved?" He nodded grimly. "We believe so. He's been here for years, always alone, never leaving his post. No one knows his name or his past. He's a mystery, and now it seems he's a murderer." Before I could respond, the shadowy figure from outside appeared in the window, his presence more menacing than ever. The attendant froze, his eyes meeting mine in terror. "Don't let him see you," he whispered urgently. "He knows you're here now." I looked back at the window, where the man was now slowly raising his hand, the gloved finger still pointing ominously. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of the situation. "We need to call the police," I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper. The attendant nodded, pulling out a phone from his desk and dialing frantically. As he spoke to the dispatcher, I couldn't help but glance back at the window, where the man's face remained hidden, his presence a dark shadow against the snowy backdrop. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the police to arrive. The tension in the room was unbearable, the silence broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the occasional crackle of the phone line. When the police finally arrived, the officers quickly assessed the situation. They questioned me and the attendant, taking notes and securing the area. As they began their investigation, the shadowy figure disappeared from the window, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness. Days turned into weeks as the story of Whitmore's Gas and Go and its sinister attendant spread through the town. Each disappearance added to the growing fear, the gas station becoming a place avoided by locals and travelers alike. One night, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, I decided to return to the station. I wanted to understand the full extent of the horror that had unfolded here. As I approached the familiar pumps, the cold wind seemed to whisper secrets, the shadows dancing under the flickering lights. Inside, the office was exactly as I had left it, cluttered and chaotic, the walls still adorned with newspaper clippings about the disappearances. The attendant was gone, leaving the room in eerie silence. I walked over to the window, peering out into the dark lot. There was no sign of the shadowy figure, no indication of his presence. Determined to uncover the truth, I began searching the station, room by room. It wasn't long before I found a hidden door behind a stack of old boxes in the storage area. My heart pounded as I opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The basement was a horrifying sight. It was a small, cramped space, the walls stained and grimy. In the center stood a heavy wooden table, its surface scarred and blood-stained. Surrounding it were various tools, knives, chains, and other implements of torture that spoke of unspeakable acts. My stomach churned as I realized the true nature of Whitmore's gas and go. A flashlight beam pierced the darkness, illuminating the room in stark, unforgiving light. On the table lay a collection of old photographs and personal items, belongings of the victims who had vanished over the years. Each photo was a silent testimony to the lives that had been brutally taken, their smiles frozen in time. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the grim reality, the whispers began again, soft, desperate pleas echoing through the basement. "Remember us? Don't forget." I felt a presence behind me, a chill that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Turning slowly, I saw him, the attendant. His face was twisted in anger and sorrow, his eyes hollow and devoid of any humanity. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed, his voice a raspy whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Now you're part of it." Panic surged through me as he advanced, his movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, stumbling over the threshold of the basement door. He lunged forward, and I scrambled up the stairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing ominously behind me. Bursting out into the main office, I grabbed my phone, desperately trying to call for help. But the line was dead. The phone smashed against the wall by some unseen force. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with fear and desperation. The shadowy figure reappeared in the window, his presence more formidable than ever. The attendant stood at the entrance, a knife glinting in his hand, his face contorted in rage. "Stop! Don't leave me," he snarled, lunging towards me. I turned to run, but the doors were sealed shut, the windows unbreakable barriers against the outside world. Trapped, I faced the nightmare head-on, the reality of the situation sinking in. Whitmore's Gas and Go was a house of horrors, its dark secrets buried deep within its walls. And now I was its next victim. But then, amidst the terror, a glimmer of hope emerged. I remembered the stories of those who had survived, of those who had found ways to communicate with the restless spirits trapped within. Gathering every ounce of courage, I began to speak, my voice shaking but determined. "Please, let us go. You don't have to hurt anyone else. Let us remember your story and help you find peace." The room seemed to respond, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as the whispers transformed into softer, more melodic tones. The shadowy figure at the window faded, his presence dissolving into the night. The attendant's anger subsided, his form wavering like smoke in the wind. "Peace," he whispered, his voice now tinged with sadness. "Find peace." I continued to speak, recounting the stories of the victims and acknowledging the pain and suffering that had fueled the tragedy at Whitmore's Gas and Go. Slowly, the tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of calm and closure. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the doors unlocked themselves, and the once menacing atmosphere was replaced by a serene stillness. The shadowy figure and the attendant had vanished, their spirits finally finding the peace they had long been denied. Exhausted but relieved, I left Whitmore's Gas and Go, the weight of the night lifting from my shoulders. The horrors I had witnessed would forever be etched in my memory, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most ordinary facades. Years later, Whitmore's Gas and Go remains abandoned, a silent monument to the tragedies that unfolded within its walls. Locals still share the tale of the haunted station, a story of desperation, loss, and the enduring quest for redemption. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the deserted lot and the neon sign flickers in the night, I can almost hear the faint whispers of those who found peace. Their voices a haunting echo in the shadows of Whitmore's Gas and Go. Story number 3. Whispers from the Basement. Night shifts at the old gas station on Route 66 had a way of stretching time into infinity. Nestled on the outskirts of a forgotten town in Illinois, Blanco's Gas and Go stood as a relic of a bygone era, its flickering neon sign casting long, wavering shadows across the deserted parking lot. I was Sam Thompson, the sole attendant, a solitary figure in a world that seemed to have moved on without me. Most nights were uneventful, just the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing by, and the distant howl of the wind through the empty streets. But tonight was different. The clock struck midnight, and the chill of autumn seeped through the cracks in the old building's walls. I was restocking the shelves when I first heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper emanating from beneath the floorboards. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. The sounds of old pipes and creaking would blending into the night. But the whisper persisted, growing slightly louder, more insistent. "Help us!" My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening intently. The whispering seemed to come from the basement, a place I rarely ventured unless absolutely necessary. The basement door was old and rusty, its hinges squeaking ominously whenever it moved. Tonight, however, it remained firmly closed, as if guarding the secrets below. I grabbed a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I approached the basement door. The whispers grew clearer, more desperate. "Help us! Don't leave us!" Swallowing my fear, I reached out and pushed the door open, creaked loudly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the abyss. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay below, and began to descend. The stairs were narrow and damp, the walls lined with old, peeling wallpaper that seemed to trap the whispers within. As I reached the bottom, the whispers intensified, filling the small, cramped space with their haunting pleas. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. In the center of the basement stood a sturdy wooden table, its surface scarred and stained. Surrounding it were various tools, rusted knives, broken chains, and other implements that hinted at a history of pain and suffering. My stomach churned as I realized what I was seeing. This was no ordinary basement. It was a chamber of horrors, a place where nightmares had been crafted and lives shattered. I approached the table cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the macabre scene. On top of the table lay a collection of old photographs and handwritten notes, their edges curled and yellowed with age. One photo, in particular, caught my eye, a family portrait of a man, a woman, and 2 children, their smiles frozen in time. Below the photo was a handwritten note in elegant, shaky script. "To our beloved family, may our suffering be remembered." A chill ran down my spine as I pieced together the fragments of the story before me. The whispers were not random. They were cries for help from those who had been tormented in this very room. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the gravity of what I was witnessing. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and a gust of wind howled through the basement, extinguishing my flashlight and plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as the whispers morphed into anguished cries, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of despair. I fumbled for my phone, the only source of light left, but it slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor and shattering against the concrete. In the pitch-black darkness, I felt a presence, a cold, suffocating force pressing down on me. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling command, "Don't leave us." Terrified, I scrambled to my feet, fumbling blindly for the basement door. My hands met the rough metal handle, and I pulled with all my might, the door swinging open just enough for me to squeeze through. I didn't stop to look back. the screams echoing in my ears as I raced up the stairs and into the safety of the main floor. Gasping for breath, I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my racing heart. The basement door stood ominously open behind me, the darkness within still alive with torment. I knew I couldn't ignore what I had seen. The next morning, driven by a mix of fear and responsibility, I decided to contact the authorities. Detective Laura Martinez arrived a few hours later, her presence bringing a semblance of normalcy to the haunted gas station. She was a seasoned investigator, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she listened to my account of the eerie whispers and the horrifying discovery in the basement. "We'll need to secure the area and bring in forensic experts," she stated, her voice calm but authoritative. "There might be evidence that can tell us who did this and why." As the police swarmed the basement, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on me. Detective Martinez guided me through the process, her professionalism a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around us. The forensic team carefully cataloged the torture tools and sifted through the old photographs and notes, piecing together the tragic history of Blanco's Gas and Go. Hours turned into days as the investigation unfolded. We discovered that the gas station had been owned by the Whitaker family, a seemingly ordinary family with a dark secret. Richard Whitaker, the patriarch, had been a man driven by desperation and debt, his once promising life spiraling into madness. The family had been locked in the basement during a terrible fire, the tools of torture suggesting a premeditated act of cruelty rather than a spontaneous tragedy. The police uncovered old records and testimonies from locals who remembered the Whitaker family's descent into darkness. Richard's obsession with securing his family's future had led him down a path of violence and despair, ultimately sealing their fate within the confines of the gas station's basement. As the truth came to light, the spirits of the Whitaker family seemed to find a semblance of peace. The oppressive atmosphere that had plagued the gas station lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that spoke of closure and forgiveness. The whispers faded, their haunting pleas silenced by the acknowledgement of their suffering and the resolution of their tragic story. But for me, the experience left an indelible mark. The night at Blanco's Gas and Go was a stark reminder of the darkness that can dwell within the human soul and the enduring power of compassion and understanding. I often find myself staring at the old photographs we recovered, each image a testament to a family torn apart by tragedy and the hope that their spirits finally found peace. Years have passed since that fateful night, and Blanco's Gas and Go remains a symbol of resilience and the enduring quest for redemption. The once abandoned building has been renovated, its dark history now a solemn part of its legacy. Visitors often share the story of the haunted basement, a chilling tale of whispers from the shadows and the importance of remembering those who suffered in silence. As for me, I carry the lessons learned from that night into every aspect of my life. The experience taught me to look beyond the surface, to seek the stories that lie hidden beneath the facade of normalcy, and to approach every situation with empathy and understanding. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the deserted streets or the night grows eerily quiet, I can almost hear the faint echoes of the Whitaker family's whispers, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. Story number 4. Whispers in the Shadows. Driving through the vast expanse of New Mexico's desert at night always held a certain allure for me. There was something hypnotic about the endless horizon, the way the stars seemed close enough to touch, and the silence that enveloped everything except the hum of my car's engine. But that particular night, the allure turned into an unsettling experience that I couldn't shake off. I had been working the late shift at a rundown motel on Route 66 for months. The job suited me, long hours with minimal interaction, plenty of time to think. On nights when the wind howled through the empty streets and the neon signs flickered erratically, I'd find solace in solitude. But that night was different. As I pulled into Blanco's Gas and Go, an abandoned station that most maps omitted, I noticed the eerie stillness that surrounded it. The gas pumps stood like silent sentinels, Their once bright colors faded by time and neglect. The neon sign above buzzed intermittently, casting an unsteady glow on the cracked pavement. I needed to refuel. My tank was almost empty, and the next station was miles away. The attendant's window was dark, the interior swallowed by shadows. I parked my car, the tires crunching on the gravel, and stepped out into the cold night air. The wind was biting, carrying a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. As I approached the pump, I noticed a figure standing near the far end of the lot. At first glance, it was just a man in his late 40s, dressed in a worn leather jacket and jeans, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. He stood motionless, staring intently at the gas station as if waiting for something or someone. "Evening," I greeted, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. "Evening," he replied curtly, his voice rough and devoid of emotion. I couldn't see his eyes, but there was something hollow about his presence that sent a shiver down my spine. I began pumping gas, the familiar routine providing a small measure of comfort. As I worked, I kept glancing toward the man, who remained unchanged, his gaze fixed on the station. After a few minutes, I finished and decided to pay. Turning to the attendant's window, I noticed it was empty, no one manning the pumps, no flicker of movement. Puzzled, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No response. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves scattered around the lot. I approached the window, expecting to find the attendant taking a break or attending to something. Instead, the window was completely dark, the glass reflecting nothing but the empty lot and the solitary figure I had seen earlier. "Excuse me," I said, a hint of concern in my voice. "Is everything all right here? I saw someone standing out there." Still no response. I turned back to my car, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe the attendant had stepped outside for a moment. As I reached for the door handle, a sudden chill enveloped me, making my skin crawl. My breath became visible in the frigid air, each exhale a ghostly puff. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Stop!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper was unmistakable, a desperate plea that sent my blood running cold. I spun around, scanning the lot, but there was no one else in sight. The lone man was still standing there, his presence more menacing than before. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Sam," the attendant's name tag read, emerged from the shadows inside the station. He was a stocky man with graying hair and tired eyes, looking every bit the part of someone who had seen too many restless nights. "Hear what?" he asked, a hint of irritation in his tone. "The whisper," someone said. "Stop." Sam glanced towards the window and then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Probably just the wind playing tricks on you," he replied dismissively. "This place gets pretty eerie at night." I wasn't convinced. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the silence heavy and oppressive. As I turned to leave, the man began to move, slowly walking towards the pump. My instincts screamed at me to stay back, but curiosity got the better of me. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The man stopped a few feet away, his face still obscured by the hat. He didn't respond, just continued to stare, his presence unnerving. Suddenly, the whisper returned, louder this time. "Stop!" Panic surged through me. I turned to Sam, desperate for an explanation. "There's someone out there. He's watching us." Sam shook his head, a look of skepticism crossing his features. "I've never seen him before. Maybe he's just another traveler, looking for help." But I knew something was wrong. The man's gaze was too intense, his silence too foreboding. I decided to leave, the unease growing with each step away from the gas station. As I reached my car, I glanced back one last time. The man was still there, standing motionless, his eyes never leaving mine. I hurried into my car, fumbling with the keys as the whispers continued, growing more urgent. "Stop!" With trembling hands, I started the engine's roar breaking the oppressive silence. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the darkness closing in around me. Every shadow flickered with the possibility of the man reappearing, his silent plea echoing in my mind. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Determined to find answers, I returned to Blanco's Gas and Go after hours, hoping to uncover the truth behind the mysterious man and the whispers. The station was exactly as I'd left it, empty and abandoned, the remnants of past patrons scattered around. I approached the window, calling out, "Sam? Are you here?" No response. The whispers were gone, replaced by an unsettling silence. I began to search the station, room by room, looking for any clues. In the back storage area, I found old newspaper clippings and photographs documenting the history of the gas station. One article caught my eye, detailing a tragic incident from decades ago. Blanco's Gas and Go had been owned by the Whitaker family, Richard, Maria, and their teenage son, Jake. One stormy night, a fire had broken out in the station, consuming the building in minutes. Richard had attempted to save his family, but tragedy struck when the fireproof doors locked from the outside, trapping them inside. The fire claimed their lives, leaving the gas station abandoned and shrouded in sorrow. The article mentioned that since the incident, drivers reported strange occurrences, phantom figures, unexplained whispers, and a lingering sense of dread. It seemed the Whitaker family's spirits were trapped, forever reliving the night of their demise. As I pieced together the story, a realization dawned on me. The man I'd seen was likely Richard Whitaker, his spirit unable to move on, haunted by the memories of that tragic night. The whispers were his plea for help, a desperate attempt to prevent others from sharing his fate. Determined to help the restless souls, I decided to perform a ritual to honor their memory and lay their spirits to rest. Armed with candles, photographs, and the old newspaper clippings, I returned to the gas station one final time. The night was cold and windy, the sky a tapestry of dark clouds and occasional flashes of lightning. I set up the candles around the living room, arranging the photographs on the table as a tribute to the Whitaker family. As I began to chant softly, invoking peace and remembrance, the air grew thick with tension. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent than before. "Stop!" I continued the ritual, speaking words of compassion and understanding. The temperature dropped further, and the flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the man appeared once more, his presence more defined yet still sorrowful. "I can't move on," he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. "Help us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out, trying to bridge the gap between our worlds. "I'm here to help you find peace," I assured him. The room began to shimmer, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a weight had been removed. The whispers transformed into a harmonious melody, the sounds of a family reunited in peace. The man's face softened, the sorrow in his eyes replaced by a sense of relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his form fading into the light. "We can finally rest." As dawn broke, the gas station felt lighter, the lingering presence of the Whitaker family finally laid to rest. The clock above the pump began to tick, its hands moving past 3 o'clock for the first time in decades, a symbol of time moving forward and spirits finding peace. Driving away from Blanco's Gas and Go, I felt a profound sense of closure. The haunting whispers were gone, replaced by the serene sounds of the morning breeze. The road ahead felt less ominous, the shadows less threatening. I knew that the Whitaker family's story would remain etched in my memory, a testament to the power of compassion and the importance of remembering those who came before us. Years later, Blanco's Gas and Go still stands, its windows no longer reflecting restless spirits but the peaceful landscape of New Mexico. Locals speak of the night when the past was finally acknowledged and honored, a story passed down through generations. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the desert night, I can almost hear the faint echoes of the Whitaker family's gratitude, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest of times, understanding and empathy can bridge the gap between the living and the departed. Story number 5. The Man in the Trunk. There's something inherently unsettling about isolated gas stations at night. They stand as silent sentinels on desolate highways, their flickering neon signs casting eerie glows on the empty asphalt. I've always found solace in the solitude of these places, a stark contrast to the bustling city life I'm accustomed to. But that one late October night in California turned my perception upside down, plunging me into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. I had been driving home after a long shift, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers providing a monotonous backdrop. The highway was nearly deserted, the only light coming from the moon and the occasional street lamp. My fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low, so I decided to pull into Blanco's Gas and Go, a rundown station on the outskirts of town. It was a place I'd passed countless times without a second thought. But tonight, desperation made me pay attention. As I approached, the gas station appeared almost ghostly under the light of the full moon. The neon sign buzzed intermittently, struggling to stay lit against the heavy clouds rolling in. The lot was empty, save for one solitary figure standing near the far end, leaning against the curb. He was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a worn-out leather jacket and jeans, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. He stood motionless, staring intently at the station as if waiting for something or someone. I parked my car, the tires crunching on the gravel. The attendant, a middle-aged man named Sam, looked up from inside the store, giving me a curt nod. "Evening," he greeted, his voice lacking warmth. "Evening," I replied, my unease growing. I grabbed my fuel hose and began pumping gas, trying to shake off the feeling that something was off. My eyes kept darting to the man at the far end of the lot. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, just stood there, an unyielding sentinel in the dead of night. After a few minutes, I finished pumping and decided to grab a receipt. As I approached the counter, the man was still there, his gaze fixed on the station. Sam was busy with a customer over the intercom, his attention divided. I handed Sam my payment, and he processed it without a word. I thanked him and turned to leave, but something compelled me to look back. The man was still watching me, his eyes hollow and devoid of any emotion. A chill ran down my spine. "Is everything all right?" I asked, unable to mask my concern. Sam glanced over his shoulder, a puzzled expression crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "Everything's fine, just a bit chilly out there." I nodded, but the unease didn't dissipate. As I reached my car, the man suddenly stepped forward, breaking his stoic stance. His face became fully visible in the harsh light of the gas pump, revealing deep lines etched by time and sorrow. His eyes bore into mine, and his mouth opened as if to speak. But no sound came out, just an intense, silent plea that made my blood run cold. Before I could react, Sam stepped out from the store, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You okay, buddy?" I forced a smile, trying to shake off the tension. Yeah. Just saw him standing there. Thought maybe he needed something." Sam's expression remained neutral. "He's just a regular. Doesn't mean anything." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man. As I drove away, the image of his hollow eyes lingered in my mind. The rest of the journey home was tense, the roads feeling narrower, the shadows deeper. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see him standing there, watching. The next morning, I tried to brush off the incident as nothing more than my imagination running wild in the solitude of the night. But as the day progressed, strange things began to happen. My phone buzzed with an unknown number calling at odd hours. But when I answered, there was only silence or faint breathing. Messages followed, each one cryptic. "Remember what you saw. Don't forget. We're still here." Sleep became elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face hollow, desperate, pleading. I couldn't escape the feeling that he was reaching out from beyond, trying to communicate something urgent, determined to find answers. I returned to the gas station the following night, hoping to uncover the truth behind his haunting presence. The station was eerily quiet, the same desolate lot bathed in the cold glow of the moon. Sam was already there, tending to the pumps as usual. The lone man was nowhere to be seen, and the place felt more abandoned than before. "Sam," I called softly, approaching him. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, meeting my gaze. "Sure. What's up?" "I saw a man standing out there last night. He didn't seem normal. Do you know him?" Sam hesitated, glancing nervously to the far end of the lot. "I've seen him a few times. Comes here late, mostly to watch the cars go by. Doesn't say much." I frowned, a sense of dread creeping back in. "Has anything happened to him? Or anyone else here?" Sam shook his head. "Not that I know of. Just a lonely guy, I guess." But deep down, I knew there was more to the story, determined to get to the bottom of it. I decided to investigate the history of Blanco's Gas and Go. I spent hours scouring old newspaper archives and public records, piecing together the fragments of the station's past. What I discovered was chilling. Decades ago, Blanco's was the site of a tragic accident. A man named Richard Whitaker had owned the station with his wife and young daughter. One stormy night, a fire broke out, engulfing the building in flames. Richard was trapped inside, desperately trying to save his family. The fire consumed everything, and the family perished in the blaze. Richard himself was found lifeless in the trunk of his car, a knife protruding from his chest. The news had labeled it an unfortunate accident, but whispers of foul play lingered in the community. Some believed Richard had lost his mind. Others suspected a sinister presence within the station. The station was eventually abandoned, the Whitaker family's tragedy etched into its very foundation. As I delved deeper, the pieces began to fit together. The man I'd seen was likely Richard, his spirit unable to move on, forever reliving the moment of his family's demise. His presence was a haunting reminder of that fateful night, a ghostly echo seeking closure. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the gas station one last time, determined to help the restless spirit find peace. I set up my camera, placing it strategically to capture any signs of Richard's presence. As midnight approached, the wind began to howl, rattling the windows and making the old building groan under the weight of the storm. I sat in the living room, the antique clock ticking steadily in the corner, his hands moving past 3 o'clock. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence was broken by a faint whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Help us!" I froze, recognizing the familiar voice from the messages. Richard's plea echoed through the room, his sorrow palpable. "Remember us!" The temperature dropped further, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching towards me with invisible tendrils. I held up my camera, the flash momentarily illuminating the room. And then, he was there, Richard Whitaker, his face twisted in anguish, his eyes hollow with despair. "I can't move on," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "My family, I failed them." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the depth of his pain. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I'm here to help." Summoning every ounce of courage, I began to speak, recounting the story I had uncovered. "Your family's memory deserves to be remembered. Let me honor your story, so you can finally find peace." The room seemed to hold its breath as I continued, sharing the details of their lives, their love, and the tragedy that had befallen them. The shadows receded, and the oppressive chill lifted, replaced by a gentle warmth that enveloped the space. Richard's figure began to fade, his sorrowful expression softening. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with a sense of relief. "We can finally rest." As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the gas station felt lighter, the weight of the past lifted. The old clock had stopped once more, its hands frozen at 3 o'clock, a silent tribute to the moment that had been finally acknowledged and honored. I left Blanco's gas and go with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had helped a tormented soul find peace. The haunting presence had been silenced, their story preserved for eternity. But the memory of that night lingered, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the power of compassion to bridge the gap. Years have passed since that fateful night, and Blanco's has remained abandoned, its tragic history now a solemn legend among the locals. I still visit from time to time, leaving flowers and candles by the old sign, honoring the Whitaker family's memory. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees and the night is still, I can almost hear Richard's gratitude, a gentle echo of a story finally told and a soul finally at peace. Story number 6. Knocking in the night. The Texas night was a vast expanse of darkness, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional flicker of a lone streetlight. I'd been working the night shift at Blanco's Gas and Go for nearly 3 years now. Most nights were uneventful, just me, the old security cameras, and the comforting glow of fluorescent lights. But lately, something had been off. It started subtly, a faint tapping sound that seemed to come from the glass door. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks or perhaps a raccoon rummaging through the trash behind the store. But as the nights went on, the tapping became more insistent, more deliberate. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. One particularly chilly November night, the tapping was louder than usual. I glanced at the security monitor, expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows. But the screen showed only darkness outside, no movement, no person. My heart raced as I listened to the rhythmic knocking, each tap echoing through the empty gas station. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and approached the glass door, the beam cutting through the darkness outside. The knocking stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I took a deep breath, pushing the door open slightly to peer outside. Nothing, just the stillness of the night. I returned to my post behind the counter, the unsettling feeling lingering. About 30 minutes later, the tapping resumed, louder and more frantic this time. My hands trembled as I reached for the flashlight again, the beam trembling in my grip. I approached the door cautiously, half expecting to see a desperate soul trying to break in. But once more, the security camera betrayed me. No one was there. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to investigate further. I grabbed the keys and stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin. The ground was slick with a thin layer of frost, making my footing precarious as I circled the gas station. The tapping continued, now coming from the side entrance. I edged closer, heart pounding in my chest. Peering through the glass door, I saw nothing but darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance around me. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine as I noticed something on the glass. A series of bloodied fingerprints smeared across the pane. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever or whatever it was had tried to force their way in. Panic surged through me. I turned to retreat, but the tapping had escalated into pounding. Desperate, I pulled the door open wider, the cold rush of air nearly knocking me off my feet. Standing there was nothing, no intruder, no shadowy figure, just the eerie stillness of the night. I slammed the door shut, leaning against it as my mind raced. I couldn't shake the image of those bloodied fingerprints. My phone buzzed on the counter, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a text from my friend Jake, who worked at the next gas station down the road. "Hey man, heard something weird tonight. Stay safe." I felt a chill, realizing I wasn't the only one experiencing strange occurrences. Deciding to call it a night, I headed back inside, locking the doors behind me. As I settled into my chair, the tapping resumed, persistent, relentless. This time, it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside the store, My blood ran cold, heart hammering. I grabbed the flashlight and followed the sound, which led me to the back storage room. The door was ajar, swinging slightly with each tap. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The room was empty, except for the rows of shelves stocked with supplies. But there, in the center of the room, stood an old wooden trunk. The tapping was coming from inside it. Trembling, I approached and lifted the lid, expecting to find someone hiding. Instead, the trunk was empty. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. I closed the trunk hastily, trying to rationalize the experience. Maybe I was overworked, hallucinating from exhaustion. But the bloodied fingerprints on the glass door told a different story. I decided to review the security footage more thoroughly, searching for any clues. Hours passed as I meticulously watched the recordings. Frame by frame, most of the night showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the empty streets and the occasional passing car. But then, around 2:45 a.m., the footage flickered and went dark, the cameras seemingly malfunctioning. My blood ran cold. It was as if whatever was trying to get in knew exactly when to disable the surveillance. Just as I was about to give up, a faint movement caught my eye, a shadowy figure approaching the store. It moved with purpose, eyes fixed on the entrance. My heart pounded as I watched it reach the door, the bloodied fingerprints appearing on the glass as it pounded and clawed at the window. Before I could react, the image distorted, the figure disappearing into thin air. The footage went black again, leaving me staring at the blank screen, the echoes of the night's terror still reverberating in my mind. The next morning, I couldn't ignore the events of the previous night. I called Jake, who confirmed he'd heard similar noises and saw a shadowy figure near his station. We decided to meet and discuss what was happening. As we sat in my office, sipping coffee and recounting our experiences, the police arrived unexpectedly. Officers approached, their expressions grim. "Morning, folks," Officer Ramirez greeted, his voice tinged with urgency. "We need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. "What's going on?" Ramirez glanced at Jake and me before speaking. "Last night, we received a call about a disturbance at your station. When we arrived, we found the body of a woman near your premises. She was found with multiple stab wounds and signs of a struggle. Unfortunately, she didn't survive." Jake and I exchanged horrified looks. "Do you have any leads on who she was?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're still investigating," Ramirez replied. "But we did review the footage from the nearby stations. There was an attempted break-in, similar to what you described. It seems she might have been trying to steal something or perhaps escape from someone." A chill settled over me. The bloodied fingerprints, the shadowy figure, it all pointed to a connection. Was the woman in the footage the same one we were dealing with? The thought was both terrifying and impossible to grasp. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake and I decided to delve deeper into the mystery. We spent the next few days combing through police reports, local news archives, and any information we could find about the victim. Her name was Emily Turner, a freelance journalist who had been investigating a series of unsolved cases in the area. Her last known location was near our gas station. The more we learned, the more unsettling the connections became. Emily had been digging into the dark history of Blanco's Gas and Go, uncovering stories of disappearances and unexplained phenomena dating back decades. It seemed our gas station wasn't just another pit stop on the highway. It was a hotspot for something sinister. One night, unable to sleep, I returned to the station alone, determined to find answers. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the deserted lot. As I approached the glass door, the familiar tapping began, softer this time, almost pleading. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The store was quiet, the only sound my own footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. I made my way to the living room, where the old trunk still stood, untouched since that fateful night. The tapping was louder now, more urgent, I knelt down, examining the trunk, hoping to find some clue. As I lifted the lid, the flashlight beam fell upon a single item, a worn photograph. It was a family portrait, similar to the ones I'd seen in the box at the back storage room. But this one was different. The faces were blurred, distorted by time and grime, but there was something haunting about it. The clock in the photo, fixed at 3 a.m., mirrored the one in my office. A sudden realization hit me. The clock wasn't just a relic, it was a marker, a moment frozen in time. I heard the tapping again, louder and closer this time, spinning around. I saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Please, help us." The figure whispered, the words barely audible. Fear clawed at me, but empathy surged through. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure moved closer, revealing the ghostly outline of a woman. Her eyes welled with unshed tears, and her expression was one of profound sadness. "We're trapped, stuck in time." Before I could respond, the room began to shift. Images flashed before my eyes, flames engulfing the gas station, screams echoing in the night, Emily trying to escape from a shadowy assailant. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. Emily had been trying to uncover the gas station's dark secrets, only to fall victim to whatever haunted the place. "I need to help you," I whispered, tears welling up. "Tell me what to do." The ghostly woman reached out, her hand passing through mine. "Remember us. Don't let our story be forgotten." A surge of determination fueled me. I knew what needed to be done. I returned to the police station, sharing everything I'd experienced and learned. Together with Officer Ramirez and Jake, we organized a proper investigation into the gas station's history, uncovering a trail of disappearances linked to the site. We discovered that decades ago, a family had lived at Blanco's Gas and Go. The father, driven by paranoia and debt, had locked his wife and children in the basement, where a tragic fire had consumed the house, claiming their lives. Their spirits had been trapped ever since, reliving that fateful night every time the wind picked up, attempting to reach out for help. With this newfound knowledge, we devised a plan to lay their spirits to rest. On a stormy night much like the ones they endured, we returned to the gas station, armed with candles, photographs, and heartfelt messages of remembrance. As the wind howled and the rain pelted the windows, we set up a small memorial in the living room, surrounding the old clock with symbols of peace and closure. We began the ritual, speaking softly to the trapped spirits, acknowledging their pain and promising to honor their memory. The temperature plummeted, and the room was filled with an oppressive energy. The ghostly woman appeared once more, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a distant echo. "You've set us free." A wave of warmth washed over the room, dispelling the darkness and lifting the oppressive atmosphere. The clock's hands began to move, ticking forward for the first time in decades, marking the passage of time and the release of the trapped souls. As dawn broke, the storm subsided, and the gas station felt lighter, almost serene. The spirits had found peace, their tragic story finally acknowledged and remembered. Emily's memory was honored, her quest for truth not in vain. Life returned to normal at Blanco's Gas and Go, but the memory of that night lingered. The clock now ticked steadily, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering those who came before us. Sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees and the night grows quiet, I can still hear the faint echoes of Emily's footsteps and the soft, lingering whispers of a family finally at peace. And I know that by remembering their story, I've ensured that their voices will never be silenced again. Story number 7. The Man in the Trunk. It was one of those nights when the wind howled through the barren trees, and the sky was a blanket of inky black punctuated only by the occasional flicker of distant lightning. I'd been driving home from a late shift, the highway stretching out before me like a ribbon of solitude. My car's heater hummed softly, battling the chill that seeped through the cracked windows. Fatigue weighed heavily on my eyelids, making every mile seem like an eternity. As I approached the old gas station on the outskirts of town, a place that seemed forgotten by time, my gas gauge flashed a warning I'd been ignoring for days. Relief washed over me. A quick stop to refuel would be just what I needed. The station was dimly lit, the neon sign flickering intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the deserted lot. Only a single attendant manned the pumps, his face obscured by the shadows beneath his cap. I pulled into the pump, the engine's roar breaking the stillness of the night. Stepping out, the cold air nipped at my cheeks, making me shiver involuntarily. The attendant watched me with a wary eye as I approached the pump. "Evening," I greeted, my voice echoing slightly in the vast emptiness. "Evening," he replied curtly, his gaze shifting nervously to the surrounding darkness. "Need some gas?" "Yeah, thanks," I said, starting to fill up. The pump clanked and whirred, sputtering to life as gasoline flowed into my tank. I glanced around, noting the absence of other cars, the eerie silence punctuated only by the distant sound of my own breathing. After a few minutes, I finished pumping and turned to pay. That's when I noticed his unease. The attendant's hands trembled slightly as he took my card, his eyes darting towards the back of the station where the shadows seemed to dance menacingly. "Is everything all right?" I asked, sensing something was off. He hesitated, lowering his voice to a barely audible whisper. "There's something you need to know. I just saw a man sneaking into your trunk." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "What? Are you sure?" He nodded, his face pale beneath the brim of his cap. "I saw him on the security camera. He was hiding there while you were pumping gas." A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I quickly glanced around, but the darkness offered no clues, only the looming presence of the abandoned gas station. "Do you have the footage? We need to call the police." He fumbled with his radio, pressing buttons I wasn't sure how to use. "I'm on it. You should stay here until they arrive." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settling in. The night, once a serene backdrop to my lonely drive, had transformed into a stage for something sinister. I stepped back into my car, the doors locking with a definitive click that echoed in the stillness. My hands shook as I dialed 911, trying to steady my voice. "There's someone in my trunk," I reported, my words barely above a whisper. "Please send help." The attendant kept watch, his eyes never leaving the shadows. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, each second stretching into an eternity. The sound of sirens finally pierced the night, growing louder with each passing moment. Relief surged through me, tempered by the fear that something might still be lurking in the darkness. The police arrived swiftly, their lights casting stark beams through the gloom. An officer approached me, his demeanor professional yet compassionate. "We got your call. Let's take a look." We made our way to the back of the station, where the attendant unlocked the trunk. My breath caught as the officer lifted the lid, revealing a figure hunched inside. The man was gaunt, his clothes tattered and dirty, his eyes wild and desperate. A glint of metal caught my eye. He held a knife, the blade catching the flickering light. "Get back," he snarled, his voice a rasp of anguish and rage. Before I could react, another officer intervened, stepping between us and the man. A struggle ensued, brief but intense, as the assailant fought to free himself. I watched in horror as the police subdued him, the knife slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the concrete. As they led him away, the man glanced back at me, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. There was a depth of pain there, a story untold that sent chills down my spine. The officers secured him, and the attendant breathed a sigh of relief, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since I arrived. Later that night, as I sat alone in my car, the weight of what had transpired pressed heavily upon me. The man in the trunk, his desperation, and the fear that had gripped me all converged into a haunting memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story, a darkness that went beyond a simple act of violence. Days turned into weeks, and life began to return to normal. Yet, the image of that man lingered, haunting my thoughts and dreams. I learned his name was Thomas, a loner who had recently lost his job and his home. Desperate and broken, he had sought refuge in a place that offered nothing but isolation and despair. One night, as I drove home from work, the memory resurfaced, the deserted gas station, the shadows that seemed to watch, and the face of a man who had lost everything. I decided to visit the station again, driven by a need to understand, to perhaps find closure for both of us. The station was just as desolate as before, the wind still howling through the trees. I approached the pump, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. As I stood there, the memories flooded back, the fear I had felt intertwining with a sense of empathy for the man who had caused it. A sudden gust of wind swept through the station, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw him, Thomas, standing in the shadows, his eyes hollow and searching. I blinked, and he was gone, leaving only the cold night and the lingering echo of his presence. I left the station that night with a heavy heart, understanding that some stories are left unfinished, their echoes lingering in the places where darkness once reigned. Thomas's plight was a reminder of the fragility of the human spirit, the depths of despair that can drive someone to unimaginable acts. Months later, I volunteered at a local shelter, hoping to make a difference for those lost in the shadows of society. Each time I saw someone struggling, I thought of Thomas, of the night that changed my perspective on fear and compassion. The man in the trunk had become more than just a terrifying memory. He was a symbol of the unseen battles that many fight alone, their cries for help lost in the winds of indifference. And as I worked to offer a hand to those in need, I carried with me the lesson that sometimes the most haunting stories are those of the lives we touch and the compassion we extend in the face of darkness. In the end, the old gas station on Maple Street remained a silent sentinel to the night that forever altered my understanding of fear, empathy, and the thin veil that separates terror from humanity.